Greetings adventurers, this is Lorne, your guild advisor, and welcome to my latest video of skip content and review for DanMachi Season 2, Episode 4. And before I just dive into this episode, let me just say, if I sound overly negative or disappointed overall, it's simply because, I read the portion of the light novel that's going to be covered in the anime, the day before I watch the episode, and I also take notes during that time and then rewatch the episode after watching it the initial time and comparing it with my notes, and then give you guys my overview of the skip content. And in regards to episode 4 and how the war game is handled, I thought it could have been handled a lot better than it was. But before I give out all my opinions on that, let's just go over the episode itself. So the episode actually opens up with an original scene with Belle reuniting with the new members of Hestia Familia, plus Ryuu, who will be offering her help in the war game. Now, I say this is original because this actually did not happen in the light novel. Belle doesn't actually reunite with the other party members until he actually goes to the war game area himself. Belle pretty much trains until the last minute with Aiz and Tiona, and the rest of Hestia Familia and Ryuu are already over at the war game area making their own preparations, one of which is, of course, Lily impersonating Luan, as you saw in this episode. They kidnapped him, and Lily is now impersonating him, and they actually do meet outside the war game area right before Lily goes into the castle as Luan, because that's her time to actually meet up with everyone while she's impersonating Luan, because Apollo Familia actually ask Lily as Luan to get more supplies, and you see her run back into the castle at that moment. They do skip some small scenes right before the war game that aren't too important, but one of them is Misha and Aina preparing for the war game, doing guild business, and Misha encourages Aina, who is worried about Belle, to cheer him on. And then there's another with Apollo several nights before the war game happening, and it's just him creepily fantasizing over Belle. And you also get to see why Apollo decided to do the war game in the first place. In theory, he could have just took Belle anytime he wanted, because Apollo Familia is over 100 members, as opposed to Hestia Familia being only 1 during the time that Apollo was trying to take Belle. But he knows that the gods wouldn't really take that pretty well, because it's just really him getting Belle by force, and we all know that Freya wouldn't like that either. Apollo would probably get effed up by Freya if he actually did do that. But taking Belle by way the war game is like legitimizing taking Belle, because a war game is this big event with stakes on both sides, and the gods really do want to see a war game, as you can see right here. They make a big spectacle out of the war game. They don't really cover this too much in the anime episode, but Omori Sensei goes into detail. The war game is a big deal. It's treated as this big sporting event, like a Super Bowl of sorts. The guild is actually attracting people from outside the city to bring them in, because this is just a huge event. Everyone has closed shop and is just watching the war game. All the bars are set up. There's extra food, extra merchants all around providing entertainment and food for that as well. It's just one big Super Bowl, basically, watching this war game. And there's also a small bit of context as to the castle that's being used. Some people might find this interesting. I found it interesting, of course, because I always like the world building that Omori Sensei puts into the novels. But this castle is called Stream Castle, and it's actually the remainder of one of several castles that was built around a hole where monsters poured out from. And this is before Orario was even a thing, and the dungeon was really even a thing, because this hole is where the dungeon is right now. But in ancient times, it was just monsters coming out of this hole, and there was just several castles around the area to serve as defenses against the monsters. But of course, Orario came in, put the lid on the dungeon, and that's how we get the dungeon in Orario right now. So it's a bit of interesting context, and actually, Ganesha Familia had to go into this castle and take out some bandits that were living there, and now Apollo Familia is coming in days before the war game to make reparations to the castle to prepare for the war game, which most of them do think is kind of pointless, because it's over 100 members versus 5. What could possibly go wrong? But going back into that scene where Lily goes back into the fortress as Luan, they do downplay how desperate Cassandra is to basically convince Daphne that something bad is about to happen. Of course, we know now that Lily basically orchestrates all the Familia members of Apollo to go this and that way and distract them from protecting Hyakinthos. But in the light novel, Cassandra is just very desperate about the whole situation with Lily sneaking in, and they really have her be quite lax in the anime episode itself. Like, I thought she'd be a lot more desperate, a lot more pushy with Daphne, but they really toned Cassandra down here. And also, right before the war game actually happens, in the light novel, there's this like really short section that's just a bunch of dialogue spoken between the different party members in Hestia, Familia, and Ryuu. And it's not even labeled who is speaking, but you can tell by the context of the text that it's being spoken who that is. But basically, the gist of it was, Welf made a new weapon for Bell, and it's made from the other half of the Minotaur horn. Like, he made Ushiwaki Maru, that red knife that Bell has, from one half of the Minotaur horn. And now with his high smith skill, Welf made a new weapon with the other half called Ushiwaki Maru Shiki. And that's actually the weapon that Bell mains, because in the light novel, as I touched on in the previous video, Hestia actually uses the Hestia knife as collateral in exchange for Lily's freedom until they win the war game and get enough balance to pay Soma back for the Hestia knife. So Bell does not actually have the Hestia knife in the light novel at this moment. He's actually using two red daggers, both made from the Minotaur horn, Ushiwaki Maru and Ushiwaki Maru Shiki. And one of the scenes I really like that they kept in is, of course, my boy Mord doing that 100k Valis bet on Bell when everyone's pretty much just betting on Apollo Familia, because why would you bet against him being 100 versus 5? But of course, we see right here that Bell wins along with the rest of Hestia Familia, and my boy Mord is rewarded. Now, some of you might not like Mord because he's the one that antagonized Bell at the end of Season 1, but he really grows on you, and here you can see that he really respects Bell now and trusts him enough to bet 100k Valis on him. And when the war game starts and Ryuu, of course, comes in all cloaked, in the light novel, she's actually cloaked the entire time, because that just makes sense, because she doesn't want anyone finding out who she is, and her being all exposed like that in the anime doesn't make too much sense, because she is still blacklisted by the guild, and being all exposed like that would definitely send some signals to people that were alive during the time that she was alive as an adventurer known as the Gale Wind, because she was pretty famous 5 years ago. So it doesn't make too much sense that they just uncloak her in the anime, though I do appreciate seeing more of Ryuu's figure, of course, but it doesn't make too much sense, but it's also not that big of a deal. But when she starts using the magic swords made by a Crotso family member, of course being Welf, it's a big deal, because if you guys don't remember, I don't know if the anime touched on this in Season 1, but they do explain the Crotso bloodline and how powerful the magic weapons they make are. They're far more powerful than regular magic weapons, and if you played through the Argonaut.memo event, the mobile game for DanMachi, you understand who Crotso is and how powerful those magic weapons are. But in the light novel, Lily's actually on the same wall as those archers that notice Ryuu, and she actually name drops those are Crotso magic swords, and that makes them worry quite a bit, because they know what Crotso is, because the Crotso magic swords are infamous for being used by the Kingdom of Rakia to basically burn down the Elven Forest, and that's why the elf that fights against Ryuu is so mad at her, because why is an elf using such cursed magic swords, the same magic swords that burned down our forest? And of course, Ryuu states that she would take any shame if it means she could help her friends, and that makes me so happy. But Lissos, the elf that fights Ryuu, is only level 2, and in the anime, though I did enjoy the cut they did with the fight between the two of them, he really shouldn't have looked as evenly matched against Ryuu, who's level 4. In the light novel, she's actually in the middle of fighting 3 other people and just takes them down with just one blow. She fends off 3 different swords with one blow and then kicks another guy back. And that's when Lissos is able to sneak in and actually get a graze against her cheek, who the currently cloaked Ryuu actually removes a bit of the hood part of her cloak, and that's when Lissos actually sees she's an elf, because that reveals one of her elf ears. But again, like I said, the anime doesn't show Ryuu being cloaked here at all. And of course, that whole situation with Lily getting 50 members of Apollo Familia to come out and deal with Ryuu is that big distraction for Mikoto to come in. But you really don't get the scale of the 50 people that come in to stop Ryuu, because you only see about 10 of them with Lissos, so it's kind of odd not being able to see that scale that's really happening. But that's when Mikoto goes in and she starts casting her gravity spell. And what the anime really fails to do here is just show how dangerous it is for Mikoto to be doing what she's doing, because for those of you that don't remember, when you're casting magic, if you get interrupted or lose your concentration, the flow of magic gets interrupted and can blow up on you. And you actually see the effect of magic blowing up later on in the episode when Welf uses his magic against the members of Apollo Familia to stop them from firing their magic against Bell and himself. But what Mikoto is doing is very dangerous. In the light novel, she's being fired at by arrows, which you see in the anime, but she's also taking damage from spells and being burned constantly, but she's still focused on holding that chance. She's still focused on using her magic. And one of her inspirations for that she thinks about while this is happening is Ryuu herself, because Mikoto was one of those witnesses during the fights against Goliath, and there Ryuu was doing casting and chanting all the while she was dodging and still attacking the Black Goliath, and that's super dangerous to do, but that's something that Ryuu is very proficient at, and it's a very rare skill to have. But that's one of Mikoto's inspirations, and that's what she holds on to as she tries desperately to hold on to that spell. And you see, of course, her use that gravity spell and actually entangles about over 20 people. You don't really see 20 people in the anime shot, but that's the ruse that Hestia Familia is planning on. Ryuu taking on about 50, and then Mikoto downing about 22 of them, and that leaves a lot less for Welf and Bell to deal with. And of course, after that scene, you get that bit where Lily is revealed to be impersonating Luan, and she's just feeding false orders from Hyakinthos to the Familia members of Apollo and tricking them into bringing out all these people to fight off against Mikoto and Ryuu. And one thing I didn't mention about Mikoto is that Lily actually uses the magic swords as a lure for more people to get to Mikoto, because originally in the light novel, Mikoto was holding this weird looking rustic longsword, and Lily actually tricks people into thinking that's another magic sword, and that's why so many people are trying to get Mikoto as well. And I'm really glad they kept the context of Luan being kidnapped and just showing Miyak's smug look. And of course, that makes us go back to that scene with Daphne and her guards fending off against Welf and Bell. And like I said before, she orders the spellcasters to charge their spells, ultimately that leading to their downfall, because Welf is able to take advantage of them holding their cast and use his will-o-wisp magic to make the magic blow up in their faces. Like I've mentioned before, Mikoto was at great risk taking all that damage and all those blows while she was chanting, and of course you see the actual effects of what could happen if you lose your concentration and that flow of magic. The magic just blows up in your faces, and the Welf basically makes all those spellcasters living bombs. And then we have the Loki Familia commentary on Bell being the one to end the conflict with Hyakinthos, the captain versus captain fight. Like, they wonder why Ryuu is not the one that's going in there. They wonder why not just bring the magic swords and just go straight through the castle. But like Bet says, Bell wants to settle this on his own strength. Bell wants to settle this himself. That boy is a man. My boy Bet respecting Bell. And there's also a small flashback with Ryuu pulling Bell aside into the forest where she says, I can only lend you my strength, but you are the one that must resolve this conflict. And of course, Bell wants to do that as well. One of his thoughts as Bell's like running through is, I want to beat him. I want to be the one to defeat Hyakinthos, because he's been beaten down by Hyakinthos 2 separate times. The first in the bar and the second during the attack on Hestia Familia. One thing I like that the anime does is show how long it's taking for Bell to charge its Argonaut skill, because in the light novel it says it lasts 1 minute, but I think they do a good job of showing Bell start the charge and then just showing what all the other Familia members are still doing. Like, they're still fighting, they're still trying to hold back the people in the war games so Bell can fight Hyakinthos without reinforcements coming from the back. And if you guys don't remember how Argonaut works, it's basically him being able to charge up a strike, and his current time limit for that is 3 minutes, and he only uses 1 minute charge for this. But you can see how powerful a 1 minute charge combined with Firebolt really is when he just bursts the entire tower's top on its end. And you see Cassandra like really try to get Hyakinthos to get out of there, and of course no one listens to her because this Cassandra is actually based on Greek mythology, and ironically she's cursed by Apollo, so no one believes Cassandra's prophecy. So poor Cassandra. But actually in the light novel she does tackle Hyakinthos, so he doesn't get hit by the initial shock of the firebolt. And when you see Hyakinthos come off the ground, like, he's kind of unscathed in the anime, but in the light novel, like, his hair's all messed up, most of his cape is in tatters, and he's not in the best shape himself. And that's when we get to my main problem with the episode, is this whole fight between Bell and Hyakinthos. Because in the anime, they make it just seem so very short and have Hyakinthos be overwhelmed immediately, where in the light novel, Bell and Hyakinthos are just exchanging blow for blow, and Hyakinthos is still stronger than Bell, but he notices something completely different about him. Like, he questions, like, is this the same person? Like, the person from 10 days ago that I fought could not meet me blow for blow, and yet he's matching it, and he's actually faster than me, because in the light novel, Bell's actually like trying to get into his blind spot, and he's succeeding and doing strikes from that. And Hyakinthos is really worried because he's like, how is this possible? This can't be the same guy from 10 days ago. He doesn't know about Bell's skill, Liara's Freeze, which allows him to grow exponentially over time. And in the light novel, there's a scene between Hermes and Hestia where he asks what Bell's level 1 stats were before he leveled up to 2, because he's guessing that Bell's stats at level 1 must have been so high that they carried over pretty exponentially into his level 2 stats. Because something you guys probably don't know if you don't read the light novels is that an adventurer can actually level up when one of their skills is at rank C, when the max, as we know now, is triple S. And of course, you can only level up after getting an ability to C and also doing a heroic feat recognized by a god, like Bell defeating the Minotaur. And Bell didn't level up until almost all his stats were double S rank, with agility being triple S. And that basically carries over into level 2. And right now at this point, after Bell upgrades, all his stats are again double S except for magic. So he has a lot of stats from level 1 carrying over, like other people's stats carry over as well, but this is a lot more because he waited until his stats were double S to go into level 2, and now at level 2 he has more stats at double S. So he's pretty much fighting on par with a level 3, because that level 3 person probably didn't wait until their stats were close to max at like S or double S before leveling up, because normally it takes very long to level up, but that's not the case for Bell with his skill. And of course, why Hyakinthos is wondering why Bell is so much stronger, why he's matching him blow for blow, he ends up getting overwhelmed by Bell, and his sword, his solar flamberge, gets pretty much destroyed by Bell's 2 red daggers, in this case the Hestia knife and Ushiwakimaru, because of course, as I said earlier, they skipped the Hestia knife subplot and Welf making Ushiwakimaru Shiki. But that's what happens. He ends up getting that sword broken. That's when he switches to the short sword and actually makes a cloud of dust and separates himself from Bell to start casting that spell. And this sequence lasted a lot longer in light novel as well. Like, Bell recognized immediately what was going on, so he fires a firebolt at Hyakinthos to try to interrupt what he's doing, and hopefully trigger that same thing that Welf did to the other people, like interrupt the flow of magic and then have the magic burst on Hyakinthos. But Hyakinthos, being desperate himself, he does get hit by Firebolt and gets knocked back, but he holds on to that cast. His concentration is still there. And before Bell can fire a second Firebolt to try and stop Hyakinthos, that's when Cassandra actually comes in and tackles him. And then the anime pretty much goes on from there, with Lily getting Cassandra off Bell, but Bell being too late to fire another Firebolt to stop Hyakinthos from finishing his magic. And then, of course, the sequence is pretty much the same, with Bell getting hit and the amulet protecting him, and then him punching Hyakinthos eventually in the face after listening to Aiza's advice, striking Hyakinthos down when he thinks he's got Bell. I'm glad Hyakinthos got his just desserts, but that fight could have been so much more, and it just wasn't. Like, I feel like they rushed a lot of stuff to get Wargame done in 4 episodes, and that this was the end result. Like, Wargame itself, if we started from the same point that we started in the light novel here, at around page 190 or so, it wouldn't be able to last the whole 2 episodes. But if they were able to like extend some of the Soma Familia stuff and have it bleed into the Wargame, then we definitely have a more solid adaptation of what the Wargame is, and you would definitely feel more of the impact that I think makes DanMachi so great. Like, you have these feelings of the characters described so much in more detail in the light novel. Like I said, Mikoto drawing inspiration from Ryuu, just the fights between Hyakinthos lasting so much longer and not making Hyakinthos look like a joke after Bell just training with Aiza and Tiona. Like, I guess that was the intention. Like, Bell trained so much that he's just able to overwhelm Hyakinthos completely, but that's not really what happened. They were pretty much fighting evenly, Bell just being a little bit faster, and Bell only being able to defeat Hyakinthos after striking him down when Hyakinthos thought that Bell couldn't do anything. But of course, the end result is the same. Bell defeats Hyakinthos and wins the war game, and I'm glad they kept the celebration with Mord getting his jackpot, and then that cut of Naza also getting it. She makes a peace sign for victory in the light novel. And the one remaining thing that's left out because they didn't touch on the Hestia knife collateral subplot is Lily taking the Valis reward and basically going to Soma and giving in exchange for the knife back. And that's when Soma actually like speaks to her sincerely for the first time. Like, he apologizes to Lily, and he also wishes her to be in good health with Hestia Familia, and that actually brings Lily to tears, because that's the first conversation, the first real conversation that Soma's had with her. And then it's described that after that, Soma Familia was in better condition. But that pretty much wraps up the episode. Like I said, I probably came off as a bit negative during this video, but that's really because Volume 6 is one of my favorite volumes, and it's understandable that not everything can be translated into anime form, but I really do think they did a disservice altogether to Volume 6, because to me it is one of the better entries into the series, and they only gave it 4 episodes, and repeatedly at Anime Expo, or as I've been told, JC staff insisted that Season 2 would only adapt Volume 6 and 7, but doing Volume 6 in 4 episodes and the remaining 8 being Volume 7 is very questionable, because Volume 7 is only about 100 pages or so more than Volume 6, and that's definitely not warranting twice the episode count. So I'm wondering what's going on here, if we're going to see more stuff beyond Volume 7 or not. But overall, I really do think Volume 6 deserved at least one more episode, and that would have spaced things out a lot better, and you would have felt a bit more impact during these character moments. They could have embellished a lot more. But overall, it's a decent adaptation of Volume 6. Like I said, it's definitely not the best adaptation. It's definitely not the worst. It could have been a lot better. But from what I heard, overall, the people that are anime only enjoyed this episode quite a bit, though some people found that it was a bit too fast. But again, hopefully JC staff knows what they're doing. Hopefully we see that Volume 6 wasn't treated this way in vain, and they do a really good job with Volume 7, as it seems to be their focus, with Volume 6 only being 4 episodes. And if you play the DanMachi mobile game Memoria Freeze, Sub-Story 4 is now out, and that covers the instance of when Lily and Hestia kidnap Luan. This is an original thing that expands upon the story in Season 2, because there's no such scene written in the light novel, so it's a nice addition to the universe of DanMachi, seeing how Luan exactly got kidnapped. But he does say one thing in here that I'm pretty sure is a huge mistranslation, because in the sub-story he name drops the Liaris Freeze ability, and he should not know about it. The only person that should know about Belle's skill currently is Hestia. But anyway guys, that wraps up this cut content and episode review for episode 4, the conclusion of the war game arc. I'm very curious to see how your guys' thoughts are on the adaptation itself. If you're a light novel reader, if you're an anime only, how did you think about this arc as a whole? Did you find the pacing too fast? Did you feel like something was missing? Or do you think they're doing a decent enough job and you enjoyed the anime for what it is? I'm very curious to know your thoughts on that. But anyway guys, I'll be back for episode 5 next week. It'll be the start of Volume 7, and you'll be able to see Hestia Familia, of course, get used to the new mansion. But again guys, I hope you found this video enjoyable and helpful to your understanding of the light novel material that was skipped over. If you like this video, go ahead and give this video a like and subscribe to my channel for more DanMachi content. To keep up with what I'm doing, follow me on Twitter and join my Discord. And as always, continue enjoying your time venturing in Ario and the dungeon. This is Lorne, your guild advisor, signing out.